Good morning, students. Happy Monday. I hope you all had a great spring break. I know I did. I worked a little bit, but I got used to doing nothing, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. So I wanted to make a morning tea video today. Here with a very turn of the century mug, and some Earl Grey tea. I'm sitting here in the room that Keon and I stay in when we're here at his parents' house. It's rainy outside, which is kind of nice. Very springy, making everything look greener, all the colors a little brighter. So today I want to do a little bit of mindfulness, and then I'm going to share something new that I have for you to check out for fun. And then I'm going to do a couple of book reviews. I've got a little stack here of things that I have read and have started to read. And then I'll share a poem at the end. All right, so for our mindfulness today, I'm just going to sit tall, and I invite you to join me if you feel comfortable doing so. Maybe pause and find a quiet place in your house to do this. You can lay down, wherever you feel like you can be in a comfortable position without having to use all your muscles to keep yourself sitting up. You want to be able to just relax and kind of almost like you're letting everything just stack. You're letting your skeleton stack so everything can just hang off of it without having to cling on. So we're just going to take 10 breaths. That's all. And the key here is to count your breaths, to keep your attention on them, to notice the pace, and don't try to, follow along with my pace of breathing. Whatever your pace of breath is right now, just go with what your body is doing. Now I'm going to close my eyes, and you may do so as well. One big breath, and now I'm going to start my 10 breaths. All right, that was my 10. I almost wanted it to last longer. No, normally I don't do that, sit still and count my breaths like that. A lot of the times when I practice mindfulness, I'm doing yoga and stretching and just tuning everything out and just paying attention to how my body feels. That was very relaxing. I hope it was for you too. So a couple of things I want to share with you. First is that I have made a teacher Instagram like many other teachers have done, and I will show you the account. I made my first post today. My account name is The Real Miss Lucas, so watch out for all the posers and wannabes because there's lots of them. You can see it's The Real MISS Lucas. And the first post has something to do with the haircut that I gave Keon. So check it out to see a little bit about that, if you would like to. Yeah, all right, so that's my little teacher Instagram. Now I wanted to share some books that I have been reading. So my very first video, I talked to you guys about this one, The Stand by Stephen King. I finally finished it, all 1,153 pages of it. I will tell you that I did not realize when I bought it that it was the complete and uncut edition. Apparently he published this book in the original version as like 800 pages. But this was $1 at a library book sale. What was I gonna do? Say no. I really wanted to read Stephen King. He's like Maine's biggest author, and being from Maine and being an English teacher, I feel like I had to do it. And I'm glad that I read it. I think I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I log everything that I read on Goodreads. I strongly recommend checking out Goodreads if you have not. It is just a website. You make an account and then you can track everything that you read, and you can also look up books that you might be interested in and see what they're rated, which I use all the time. So anytime I'm about to read a new book or buy a new book, I look it up on Goodreads, and if it has at least 4 stars on Goodreads out of like thousands of reviews, I know I'm probably gonna like it. So I gave this book 4 stars. Its average rating on Goodreads is 4.34. Really cool to read a pandemic turning into an apocalypse novel during the time that we're living in, and put things into perspective, because everything was so much worse in this book than it is for us in real life. And he is a good writer with some suspenseful events, but I would be very curious to know what the original cut edition is like, because this was so long that I was ready to be done, and I felt like the most exciting part of the book was like the last 200 pages. And I get why he included so much stuff in here to, you know, enrich the characters and make the whole apocalyptic world really come to life. So that was cool to read about. But it was just really, really long. But I've also never read a book that long before. I probably would read another book of that length again, but I would choose it very carefully. So if you're interested in this, definitely check it out. Stephen King is obviously a very popular, well-acclaimed author. So he is worth reading. It's just up to you if you want to read the longest book possible. So, and one I just finished last night was this one. It's called The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I really hope I pronounced his name right. I never looked it up. This book is about a slave in Virginia who ends up escaping, and he gets this like crazy power and becomes involved in the Underground Railroad. And I gave it 3 stars. The writing, I felt like the plot had some lulls in them that made it hard for me to, you know, when you put a book down, it's the best when you can't wait to pick it back up again. And I just didn't get that feeling with this book. I also had a hard time connecting with the main character. Part of that's because there's so much in here about like African American culture and, you know, Black heritage, and I'm white and from Maine, and I feel like it's really valuable for me to know about it, but it's personally something that I struggle to connect with because there's nothing like that as a part of my family history. I took an African American literature class at Hollins a couple years ago, and that was really valuable to me to learn more about African American identity and their experience as a whole, that, you know, being a Black person in America. Obviously, I'm no expert on the matter. I feel like I have only learned what is just on the surface of a very deep and, you know, really interesting topic, a really important topic. But what I learned in that class from reading literature by African Americans was some themes about memory and the power of memory, because a lot of people whose ancestors were slaves coming over, if they went to Africa and got slaves and brought them over on a ship, they were not documented properly. So there's no way to really know. There's kind of like this gap all of a sudden in the family history for the descendants of these people who were slaves. And there's this idea that when that memory is missing, there's a power in recreating a memory or creating a memory. And so, and learning about that was really interesting to me. And a lot of this in the book and like his powers is related to that, to memories and the power of memories, and what strength there is in choosing to, or in being able to remember rather than forget. So that was very interesting. And obviously the water dancer, there's a lot to do with water in here. And in my literature class, we talked a lot about water because bodies of water were how slaves were transported in boats across the ocean, up rivers. But at the same time, there's this interesting contrast in literature with my English teacher mind thinking about water as a symbol, symbolizes life and renewal and rebirth. And that's a huge contrast to slaves coming across, being taken across the ocean from Africa to North America and jumping overboard because they didn't want to live as a slave, or dying and being thrown overboard, and just the death and the destruction that whole industry caused. So the topic, I think, is really important, and I think anyone should be reading books like this to learn more about the people who ultimately couldn't record their own stories. I mean, it's a piece of fiction, but some of the events are based on true events, and it's important to know about the people who couldn't write their own stories. But in terms of a piece of literature, for me, I just struggled to connect with it. So 3 stars for that one. Last but not least, very brief here, I'm about to start reading this, Hour of the Assassin. I feel like I needed something quick and thrilling to read after The Water Dancer. So I've chosen this one. It's about a former Secret Service agent who becomes like a pretend assassin to train people to defend against assassins. But then there's like a job that he's doing, and someone ends up getting murdered, and he's framed for it. So I kind of thought I wanted to switch to something a little more lighthearted than the struggle of the slaves. So those are the books that I'm reading. All right, last thing for today. Gonna get my phone out here. So I found this podcast, and it's called Poetry Unbound. And so I've been sharing poems with you guys every video. I think April is National Poetry Month. So now it's especially appropriate that I'm sharing poems with you. And I was listening to that podcast, Poetry Unbound, and it's an Irish guy so that's already cool, as you can listen to his really neat accent while he reads poems and talks about them. And every episode, they're very short, like 8 to 15 minutes, roughly. Every episode, he reads the poem, he talks about it, and then he reads it again. And I love that structure. I don't want to read everything. I don't really have a ton of time to do that in every video, but I strongly recommend you check out his podcast. And I was listening to the latest episode, and it was a poem that he was reading in honor of healthcare workers, because during this time right now, obviously a lot of healthcare workers around the world are under so much stress from coronavirus just overwhelming their system, and the constant changes that they have to adapt to, and the struggle and the schedule and the exhaustion and the stress of having to care for patients who can't get visitors even when they may be taking their last breath. So really uplifting. But this poem I really like. He read it. It's called Leaving Early by Leanne O'Sullivan. It says, "My love, tonight Fanula is your nurse. You'll hear her voice sing-song around the ward, lifting a wing at the shore of your darkness. I heard that in another life, she too journeyed through a storm, a kind of curse, with the ocean rising darkly around her, fierce with cold and no resting place, only the frozen rocks that tore her feet, the light on her shoulders. And no cure there but to wait it out. If while I'm gone your fever comes down, if the small, salt-laden shapes of her song appear to you as a first glimmer of earth light, follow the sweet, hopeful voice of that landing. She will keep you safe beneath her wing." So Fanula is an Irish name. I learned a lot about this poem from listening to the podcast, so I encourage you to listen to his whole episode about it, but I'll share a few tidbits that I liked. On the first reading, the literal description that's happening in the poem is the narrator is speaking to her loved one, and the loved one is presumably in the hospital. He uses the word ward. And Fanula is the name of the nurse who's caring for the loved one. And it kind of acknowledges that Fanula herself also has a story, probably has experienced challenges in her life like any human, has experienced trying times, and that the loved one should rely on her hopeful and sweet voice when they are struggling. So what's cool about that, just on the literal meaning, is that sometimes we forget that the people who care for us have their own problems. This might be true for your parents. This might be true for, a teacher or a healthcare worker, like a nurse, doctor. They're people too. And sometimes it can be weird to remember that, especially your parents, because you're so close to them and have such a specific relationship with them. And then to remember that they're a separate human being and they have their own experience of the world, and that experience is full of joy, but also, has its own struggles. So there's a literal meaning in that, but then there's also this metaphor of Fanula being a bird. There's a lot of talk about her voice lifting a wing. Let's see. And at the end, she will keep you safe beneath her wing. So those are the most specific pieces of language that reference her as a bird, which is kind of a beautiful way to think about, a nurse. Like a mother bird keeps her babies safe under her wing and hides them from enemies or keeps them dry from rain, and thinking about a nurse taking that much care for a patient is nice. And then one thing I learned from the podcast, which is why I like this podcast, because I would never have known this reading this poem on my own, and I never would have looked up the name Fanula. It's also spelled really weird. I'll zoom in on it. That's how it's spelled. So first of all, I wouldn't even have known how to pronounce that. But apparently Fanula is like this really big deal mythical creature in Irish mythology. And there's a story that Fanula was the oldest of 4 siblings or something like that, and they were basically cursed to be swans and live on stormy lakes and bodies of water around Ireland for 900 years, just enduring storm after storm after storm. And apparently Fanula, as the oldest, was able to find their way out of that curse through some kind of magic and saved her and her siblings. So there's an even deeper meaning here, an illusion, right? Illusion with an A, not with an I, happening in the poem, which gives it even more depth and strength and impact. So Poetry Unbound is the name of that podcast. Strongly recommend, just to, again, when you go for a walk, or if you're sweeping the kitchen floor or just laying in your bed bored out of your mind. I recommend listening to it. It's not very long. The episodes are not long. And it's a great way to stay connected to something bigger than yourself in a positive way. Because if you've just been watching a lot of the news like me, it can be kind of straining on, your emotions and your mental well-being. So that was my morning tea for today. I'm hoping at some point to convince Keon to do a push-up challenge with me to see who can do more. He keeps being like, well, how many push-ups can you do? I think he's nervous I might beat him. But I don't think that would happen. So we'll see. But yeah, so check out my Instagram, my teacher Instagram, The Real Miss Lucas, if you would like to follow along with some pandemic shenanigans. And I hope you guys are having a great day. Reach out anytime with questions, of course, as always. I encourage you to practice mindfulness and just be gentle with yourselves during this stressful and seemingly unending time. This too shall pass. All right. I love you all. Talk to you soon. Bye.